Today is a big day in news. We've got Biden saying bye-bye to the world. We'll explain just ahead. We have D.C. correspondent Chris Bedford's exclusive interview with new Freedom Chair Caucus Andy Harris on the road ahead for the Rogue Caucus. And we've got the urgent matter of George Soros's guerrilla radio takeover. We'll be diving into so much, but welcome to the chaos. I'm Jill Savage. Today is Tuesday, September 24th. And, you know, Biden is saying farewell to the world in style. Well, I mean, it's his own unique style, slurring his words through his final address to the United Nations on Tuesday.
This summer, I faced a decision whether to seek a second term as president. It was a difficult decision. Being president has been the honor of my life. There's so much more I want to get done. As much as I love the job, I love my country more. I decided after 50 years of public service, it's time for a new generation of leadership to take my nation forward.
So long, Joe. We hardly knew you, but that's because you've been a largely absentee president, and who knows who's actually running your administration, or at this point, is it running you? Yet it was a recent blunder at the Quad Summit, Biden's meeting with the leaders of the United States, Australia, Japan, and India that really defines his entire presidency.
So I want to thank you all for being here. And now, who am I introducing next? Who's next?
Distinguished guests, the Prime Minister of the Republic of Israel.
It's so good. So who is next? Well, that'll be Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, depending on the decision that Americans make in November. But as America, they're approaching a fork in the road. So can we take the path towards war and peace, poverty or prosperity, liberty or tyranny? So joining us now to discuss America's fateful choice in our increasingly dangerous world is Blaze Media Editor-in-Chief Matthew Peterson and Justin Haskins, Director of Socialism Research Center at the Heartland Institute. So Justin, I mean, what should we even make of Biden right now and his big farewell at the UN?
And what a way to go out. I mean, has there ever been a worse way of leaving office? He's basically being thrown out by his own party. Because he's too old, he can barely function. He doesn't know what's going on around him. He's constantly lost and confused. This is truly one of the worst presidents in history. It's one of the worst presidential moments in history. And what's really incredible is at least he's being covered today. Usually we just ignore him now in the news. We don't even talk about Joe Biden anymore because of how pointless he's become. So just sad. It's just really, really sad and pathetic, but good riddance. His policies have been horrible for the country, and I'm glad to see him go.
Justin, what's amazing right now is that we are all used to this situation already. I mean, I feel like I need to point out to myself, to rile myself up, that the president of the United States really isn't the president of the United States. One candidate didn't have a primary vote, won a single primary vote, and the other candidate has had 2 assassinations attempts so far in this election, and the person sitting in the White House is not really in charge of himself, his mental faculties, never mind the country. So do you think that this is actually a moment in which world peace is really on the line? Is this a dangerous moment, or are we just going to surf through it?
Well, I'll say this. If Kamala Harris becomes president and people look back at this moment, these moments leading up to it, really all 3.5, 4 years of the Biden administration, no one will be surprised if we end up in war. And then you look back at everything that led us to that point. Just the way that it was handled, the disaster in Afghanistan, the chaos in Ukraine, the financial chaos that we've had with inflation and, record high prices, and just it's been insanity ever since Biden came into office. And it's not going to surprise anyone with a weak leader like this that we end up in a full-blown war, especially given how they've handled Ukraine. They've been extremely aggressive, constantly crossing their own red lines over and over and over again, ramping up the tensions between these countries. We are at an extremely dangerous moment in history. It really does. It may not amount to war, but it feels so much like what I imagined the months and years leading up to World War II felt like, where you just look around and you say, boy, it really looks like this thing is going to get worse and worse and worse, and we could all end up in war soon. And then sure enough, it happened. It certainly seems like that's the track we're on, unfortunately.
So, Justin, you mentioned Ukraine. Zelensky recently visited the United States in what appears to be a blatant act of election interference. I mean, I love that he went out there and threw out that he didn't like J.D. Vance. Well, yeah, because J.D. Vance is not going to be all for the Ukraine-Russia war. But Zelensky also reportedly was meeting with Harris and Trump. So when we look at all this, like, what are we supposed to make of Zelensky and all this ring kissing that's going on right now?
Well, I think there's no doubt who Zelensky wants to be president of the United States, and it's not Donald Trump. And the reason for that is because Zelensky's entire platform is fighting this war with Russia, which is understandable from his position, but that is his position, and he needs the United States of America to support him in order to do that. And I think that it's been made very clear by the Trump administration or the Trump campaign that their goal coming in, if he's elected, is going to be to end that war, to come to some sort of resolution so that things don't escalate and get significantly worse. And that means Ukraine having to make some concessions, which are unjust and unfortunate and all of that, but probably a reality that needs to happen if we're going to avoid war. And I think, frankly, Vladimir Putin is just waiting around to see what happens, to see whether he should escalate if Kamala Harris becomes president or de-escalate if Trump becomes president. I think we're in a holding pattern, but things are going to get a lot worse if Kamala Harris is elected because Putin knows tensions are only going to get higher. And that Kamala has, just like Joe Biden, no intention of ending this war. She'll support Ukraine forever. And so why not continue to escalate things and try to bully people into ending the war? So we're, again, in an extremely dangerous time here. And Vladimir Zelensky, I feel for the people of Ukraine, to be sure, but I am not in Ukraine. I am not in Europe. It is not my war, and I don't want it to be my war, and I don't want it to be my neighbor's war, and I don't want it to be our children's war, because this isn't about us. And so what I want is a president who understands that and is willing to do the right thing in light of that.
Yeah, Justin, let's talk a little bit. Last question we have with you. Let's get a little bit more at what Kamala Harris would do if she were president. As you said, she would continue to support Ukraine. We know that forever. Right. So there's a forever war there. But how do you even evaluate? I mean, does she have a plan in the Middle East? Like, what is she going to do there?
Oh, boy. I mean, the Biden-Harris administration has made it very clear that their plan for at least Israel and Hamas and dealing with that conflict is to try to push Israel into having some kind of two-state solution to end the war as quickly as possible, make all these concessions to terrorists who butchered thousands of people, including a lot of children and innocent women and people like that. I mean, that seems to be their strategy there. We know what happened in Afghanistan. They basically just gave the country away to the Taliban, which now doesn't even allow women to speak openly in public or to have basic human rights. So I would say, just based on what we know so far, I think it's pretty clear that if that strategy continues, it's just concession upon concession upon concession to the radicals who are in the Middle East. Not all people in the Middle East, of course, are radicals, but the radicals in the Middle East have made out really, really well under the Biden-Harris regime. And I think that that's going to continue. And I would love for someone to present some kind of evidence to suggest that that won't happen. But if you're terrorists or you're the Taliban or something, and you're sitting in the Middle East right now looking at this election, who do you want to win? Do you want Donald Trump to be president? I don't think so. Who do you think they would cast their vote for? It is undeniable that they want more weakness in the White House, which is all we've had for 3.5 years, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse with Kamala.
I want to tell everybody we have exactly 6 weeks until the election, and I want everybody that can hear to take that Justin Haskins energy that you just heard and rile up all of your friends because there are 6 weeks left until the election. So, Justin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Coming up, Chris Bedford has an exclusive interview with the new House Freedom Caucus chair, Andy Harris. Don't go anywhere. You know how difficult it is with inflation right now, and you want some of that Justin Haskins energy. If Kamala Harris somehow, some way gets elected in 6 weeks, inflation is going to be here to stay. But what do you do when it comes to your health insurance? Is there only one option? Well, there is. There's another option. Take a look at Lassie Health. That's Laasy, because Lassie Health isn't actually health insurance, but it is the access that you need to healthcare without all of the red tape, restrictions, and the inflated costs. And a great part about it in this economy is it starts at just $30 a month, and you get transparent pricing, comprehensive coverage tailored to your needs, and the access to the healthcare that you want without breaking the bank. And there's no annual or lifetime caps on services, and you can start a plan at any time. So for the $30, what do you get? Well, it's going to include over 400 prescription medications for free virtual unlimited mental health counseling, free 24/7 virtual urgent care. And all we know, if you're not insured, the lab tests, the image tests, the procedures and surgeries, that's where it's going to get you. But you can even get a plan right now with vision and dental and primary care for your comprehensive coverage for that you need and your family. There's also business plans out there. So people are saving thousands on everything from MRI scans to emergency visits, hospitalizations, and more. So be sure to check out affordable plans that put you in control of the healthcare at healthylink.com/blaze. For a limited time, you can get your first month free, up to $100 off eligible plans. So get healthy, be healthy, and stay healthy without breaking the bank at healthylink.com/blaze.
We just wrapped up an interview with Congressman Andy Harris, who is the only Republican from the Maryland delegation to the House of Representatives. But more to our interest is the new chairman of the Freedom Caucus. And the Freedom Caucus has had a rough couple of months where they lost a chairman in a Republican primary who was targeted by some very powerful people. So Harris is coming in as the House of Representatives is in for another couple of difficult months on government spending fights. And so he's got a little bit of an outline of the plan that they want to take, that conservatives want to see the House take, and also a warning for the Speaker for December. I'm Chris Bedford, D.C. correspondent with The Blaze, and I'm here with the newly elected chairman of the Freedom Caucus, Congressman Harris. Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you.
Now, you come in at an interesting time in Congress. It's a new week. Something seems to be changing every day. As it seems to stand right now, there's no SAVE Act going through, at least not attached to spending. No clean 6-month CR. There doesn't seem to be any promise to not have an omnibus, at least not one that I've heard from leadership, at least an omnibus in December. And it appears a 3-month CR might be passing under suspension with Democrat votes. You're in charge of the Freedom Caucus now, or at least trying to chair it as much as anyone can. What are some of the next moves for a Congress that is divided, and even a Freedom Caucus that itself voted in some different directions in the last fight?
Sure. So obviously what we have till the end of the year is we're going to have a big spending battle. And we've got to make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. The bottom line is we should have passed that 6-month CR with SAVE. SAVE is incredibly important to the integrity of the election. The Speaker was absolutely right with that. Unfortunately, we couldn't get enough Republican votes to pass it, so we're going to do what we've done in the past, punt this into December. The difference is that the Speaker has indicated he will not back an omnibus. I managed to help get this to December 20th instead of earlier in the month, because I believe that a shutdown in December shouldn't be off the table. It's not going to affect an election 23 months later. It's going to send a message to the Democrats that we're serious about cutting spending, and if you're not serious about it with us, if we win the House and the Senate and the presidency, we'll just kick this into the next year and take care of it then. I think that's the best way to proceed now.
Do you think you can get your colleagues behind a shutdown fight right before Christmas, Social Security checks, all the drama they're going to try and drop on you from the media?
Well, the beauty is that we could reopen the government January 3rd when we take over. So it would basically be 3 days. Nobody's working that. The first falls on a Wednesday. I bet you most federal employees are taking Thursday and Friday as vacation days. So basically, nothing's going to happen in the government for 3 days. And then when we come back on the 3rd, God willing, we hold the majorities. Different deal, new sheriff in town. Let's get a handle on spending.
Yeah, DC seems to stop working at the beginning of Advent calendar. That's the start of vacation here, which I personally don't mind. Now, you're an appropriator, I think one of 4 in the Freedom Caucus, the most senior of them, and you've got now a 3 or 4 month, 3-month trial period essentially as chairman of the caucus. But this is a new tactic for the Freedom Caucus to go with. Conservatives have sometimes been criticized by people on appropriations, saying you guys talk a big game, but you don't even know how to do this. What is the future then for some of the tactical changes that you're going to try and do in this rather difficult time to be tested?
So again, historically, there've only been, I think it's only one other time in the past 40 years that we've gone from a Democrat administration to Democrat control of at least 2 of the 3, the Senate and the President, to complete control by Republicans. That changes, to me, that's a completely different scenario. I tell people, look, every CR is not the same. When you have a CR that potentially could go into a new administration where you hold all the levers of power, that's very different from a CR where you're just going to be negotiating, as I say, an omnibus bill just before Christmas, larded up with $100 billion in extra Senate spending, a huge, and that doesn't even count the emergency spending, the supplemental spending that the Senate wants to do. This is going to be a huge battle in December, and I hope the Speaker is up for it. I hope that he is true to his word. We're not going to deal with an omnibus bill larded up with all kinds of goodies for Christmas, I guess they'll say, and be willing to say, look, you're not going to do the work for the American people of controlling this spending. We'll see you on January 3rd.
And you're no stranger to fights with Republicans over politics. You entered the Maryland Senate primarying a sitting incumbent. Your first shot at the House of Representatives was the same. Right now, you've got the Congress seemingly split into so many different groups. You've got the 12 billers who don't want to vote for any CR. You've got the folks who are really kind of still mad at basically any speakership. Mm-hmm. You've got those folks who don't want to do anything that's going to upset the Pentagon. What's the sort of path to bringing those sort of people together, not only for people like yourself at the Freedom Caucus, but then for House leadership, Republican leadership, and the role they might play in that?
Sure, that's a great question, because I'm going to deal with just one of those groups you talked about, which are the defense folks. I mean, the bottom line is they're always against continuing resolutions because in the past, continuing resolutions have always merely continued the defense spending from the last year, again, into the CR period. There is no reason you can't write a continuing resolution that has all the stops and starts the Department of Defense needs. There's no reason. You could do it. We could pass it in such a way that the defense appropriators would be quite happy with it. But again, the powers in Washington want that defense spending coupled with the non-defense spending. So when we negotiate up defense spending, that there's a big plus up in non-defense spending. As far as I'm concerned, we broke that parity several years ago, and that parity was here since I've been in Washington. We broke that parity. Now it's time to take the next step, which say, let's break defense away from the rest of the continuing resolutions. Let's treat it, and it does need to be treated separately because honestly, in this day and age, with Russia and China able to turn on a dime in terms of new defense strategies and programs, we need to make sure that we can do that. But we can do it. We just have to stop doing things the way we've always done them. And there's no reason not to. I've proposed this now for several months, and everybody nods and says, well, that's a pretty good idea, you know. And then, well, we can't do it because we've never done it. Well, that's not a reason. That's not a reason anymore. We've never had a $35 trillion federal debt. We haven't had $2+ trillion deficits for several years in a row. It's about time to try something new.
I know everything changes if there's a Republican majority coming in the Senate, the House, and then the White House as well. But what changes for the Speaker if he ends up passing an omnibus under suspension with more Democrats than Republicans? Are you looking at
an omnibus or a CR?
An omnibus.
He's in trouble if he passes an omnibus with you don't want a suspension because he
new
gave
Speaker in January. Then
yeah, look, he told us this morning he is not going to agree to an omnibus in December. I mean that's simple. I mean he used those words, so I'm going to I think we should hold him to that.
As the only Republican in the Maryland delegation, do you think it's going to be awkward in Jamie Raskin's prison camp in January, or is that going to work out just fine?
Look, you bring up a good point. I'm worried. I mean, if the Democrats take control, Jamie Raskin will be in charge of stuff. And we've heard what he says. He will look. The Democrats want to lock up their opponents. That's the bottom line. They tried it with the president, and it was so much fun to watch. Every time they'd indict him or accuse him of something else, his poll numbers went up.
It's incredible.
It's interesting if you listen to what's gone on in the past month and a half. They stopped talking about it because they know every time they talked about it, the independent, the hardworking men and women of America look at that and go, "That's unfair." We know there's a two-tier system. There's a system for the wealthy and a system for us, and they're treating President Trump like they treat us, and they don't like it. So they stopped talking about it. It is fascinating to have watched the conversation in Washington for about a month around the time of the last indictments and trials was almost entirely in committee meetings and everything. It was almost, he's a felon, he's a convict, he's this and this. Totally gone. I mean, I think Kamala made one mention of it in the debate briefly, and that's it. That wasn't the point she was pounding home, because every time she pounds it, her numbers would go down and the president's would go up.
You can see it. You can see the T-shirts for sale on the Ocean City Boardwalk. That's when you know you're starting to actually change the culture.
Oh, I know it. When I go into town on the Eastern Shore, I see I'm voting for a felon shirt or hat almost everywhere I go.
Congressman, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Well, big thanks to Chris Bedford for doing that. And Peterson, the thing that I heard that is probably the most newsworthy is the talk of a shutdown in December. And they want to send a message, Andy Harris said, to the Democrats that they're serious about cutting spending.
Well, I don't know about you, but I certainly hope so. I hope they're serious about something over there. And it certainly is promising. I mean, he seems sincere, right? I think that the Freedom Caucus is becoming the de facto, rah-rah, we're holding the line to voters. But will that happen? I don't know. I mean, we'll see what happens. I do think there's a potential for some interesting activity on his part and the caucus's part as they grow and move forward, and sort of official Washington falls apart, but we'll see.
As Reagan used to say, the last best hope for America. It feels like that's the House Freedom Caucus right now. When we come back, we'll be talking about, is this the end of free speech? Because George Soros is going to be taking over the airwaves. And we'll tell you how bad it will be next. Well, speaking of how bad things will be, the radical left, they are talking about court reform, but, don't be fooled, because the radical leftists want to eliminate the court's conservative majority by packing the Supreme Court with their own handpicked justices to get the outcomes that they want. And President Biden has gotten into the act by making court reform one of his final priorities before he leaves office. But again, this is the end game, is court packing. So don't be fooled, because at First Liberty, we want to call this what it is. It's a Supreme Court coup. These extremists want to eliminate the court's conservative majority by packing the Supreme Court with their own handpicked justices to get the outcomes that they want. But the frightening thing is that come January, their plan could be our nation's reality. And the simple majority votes in the House and Senate, combined with the president's signature, could turn their plan to pack the court into law. But right now, if we unite our voices, if we take action together, we can put a stop to the radical left's plan to take over the Supreme Court. The future of the court, preserving an independent judiciary, is in our hands. If we lose the court, we will lose this country. And that's why we're taking action. And we need you to join us, because with 1 million patriots like you standing for the Supreme Court, we can safeguard the independence of the judiciary, just as the founding fathers intended. And by saying no to the left's Supreme Court coup, we can secure the blessings of liberty and protect the future of our constitutional rights for our children and our grandchildren. So go to supremecoup.com/Jill. That's supremecoup.com/Jill to learn how you can help stop the radical left's takeover of the Supreme Court. Radical billionaire George Soros is plotting a guerrilla radio takeover in an alarming move. The Federal Communications Commission, the FCC, voted this week to greenlight the bankruptcy rescue deal for the radio giant Audacy. It's the second largest radio station network in the United States, and this put the would-be giant microphone in the clutches of a megalomaniac madman. Now, Glenn Beck interviewed the FCC chair, Brendan Carr, this morning about the hostile takeover. And here's what Carr had to say.
Brendan, tell me, do I have this right, first of all, about the George Soros takeover of radio stations? And if so, why was there an exception made and fast-tracked?
Well, as you note, the New York Post has a story out last week, or actually yesterday, that says that the FCC last week adopted an order that effectively fast-tracks Soros's purchase of these 200 radio stations. And I haven't, commented on that publicly, because the fact is the FCC hasn't released a final decision to the public yet. But the reporting is that we adopted it last week in a 3-2 vote. I've been outspoken on this particular issue for the reasons that you talked about. We have a very clear process at the FCC that we've set up that could take 6 months, could take a year to go through to review the foreign ownership at issue here. But for reasons that are not sort of plain to me, the FCC Commission, for the very first time ever, has skipped that process.
In a September 19th hearing before Congress, FCC Commissioner Carr explained why this was so unusual, in part because Soros has more than 25% foreign investors in the stake. And he has petitioned Biden and Harris to fast-track his offer, despite an assessment to its national risk securities.
You've indicated there's a transaction where a Soros-backed group would take ownership of over 200 radio stations across 40 different markets, after the FCC originally indicating that transaction could be reviewed and approved at the bureau level without a commission vote. It's now become clear that that is a decision before the full commission, and it's one that I would assume now or in the near future the commission would approve. I think what's interesting about it is that the FCC here is not following its normal process for reviewing a transaction. We have established over a number of years one way in which you can get approval from the FCC when you have in excess of 25% foreign ownership, which this transaction does. And it seems to me that the FCC is poised to create, for the first time, an entirely new shortcut.
Yeah, thank you. As you pointed out here and previously, these proceedings for transfer of ownership have been expedited. What exactly makes this case so deserving of an expedited proceeding so far, from what you could tell?
There is nothing about this transaction that is out of the ordinary. It's the type of thing that we see all the time, and the FCC has a process for this. The full commission itself has never signed off on a shortcut like this. What we usually do is we require people to file a petition with us. We bring in national security agencies. They can review the foreign ownership. It's probably no big deal here, but we review that foreign ownership and then we vote. Here, they're trying to do something that's never been done before at the commission level.
Joining us now to discuss this Soros radio takeover is Blaze media critic Rob Eno. And Rob, let's be honest, we're 6 weeks away from the election. This is a huge move. How do you see this affecting the election?
Well, like you said, we're 6 weeks away from the election, right? And there are, I believe, 25 of these 200 stations that Audacy, used to be Entercom, owns, that are talk radio or news, and another 35 are sports. And we all know that sports jocks talk about politics too, right? 7 of them are in Pennsylvania. 7 of the news and talk stations are in the battleground state of Pennsylvania. Who knows? Next week, we could have 7 local conservative hosts or multiple conservative hosts, because a lot of these Audacy stations have local conservative hosts. Some of them are our friends. I know a handful of them. Could be out of jobs next week, right? And if they're out of jobs next week, right before the election, that is silencing a voice. And I think that the biggest part of this is the foreign collusion possibility, right? This is 25% owned by foreign entities. We don't know who they are. Are they Russian? Are they Chinese? Are they just British? Who are these foreign people? I don't think we know yet, because a national security analysis was not done.
It truly is astounding how that point that they're fine with foreign collusion when it suits them, and they do it all the time. But more proximate to us, this could potentially affect Blaze Media, could it not? I've been thinking about this all day.
Yeah, I mean, Glenn Beck and Mark Levin, both one's on Premier Radio Networks, which is a Clear Channel company. The other's on Cumulus, which is a different company, for their radio shows. So two of our hosts have nationally syndicated radio shows that are on some of these 25 stations in pretty big markets. If all of a sudden, next week, George Soros decides that those stations will no longer be talk stations, that they'll go to smooth jazz or whatever they go to, they could be off the air in markets. And that's why, it's really important the things that Blaze Media does. We have our own streams. You can listen to to Glenn Beck or Mark Levin, either on Blaze TV, in Mark's case, and in Glenn's case for his radio show, Mark on his TV show, and Glenn on our Blaze Radio app or our Blaze Radio point on Blaze News. You can listen to those shows, and it's a way to get that information out of there. Now, I think that part of the good thing about this is that a lot more of the younger generation is getting their news from podcasts, from TikTok, from things like that. So long term, this might not be as big of a problem. But a lot of those swing voters in these swing states still listen to talk radio. They turn the radio dial, they hear something they're interested in, and it could affect them.
But Peterson, this is why we need people to subscribe to Blaze TV.
Yeah, the future is you have to subscribe directly to platforms like Blaze TV and Blaze News, because if you don't, they're going to take it away. And we know, who has pointed out the problem with George Soros before everyone else for many years. That's Glenn Beck, and you could easily see this move getting him shut off the air in some places.
BlazeTV.com/Jill. It's the promo code's Jill40. We might as well throw it out there. Rob, thanks so much for coming in today.
Thanks for having me on.
It's bigger than the cats. Blaze's own Julio Rosas is back in Springfield, Ohio, with the real story behind how this small town is grappling with the influx of Haitian migrants. Up next.
A city that's in absolute turmoil.
One student is dead.
Everybody's against everybody.
More than 20 others are hurt.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs. The people that came in, they're eating the cats.
We brought all these Haitians in to try to help turn Springfield around.
They're eating the pets.
I don't think it needed turned around.
They're eating the dogs. For the past few days, Blaze Media national correspondent Julio Rosas has been in Springfield, Ohio, documenting the Haitian migrant crisis, and he joins us right now. So, Julio, I mean, you have been there on the scene for quite some time now. So, what's the most impactful thing that you've seen up there?
So, aside from the public road safety issue, which is something that I've talked about last time I was here, one of the other issues has been the city of Springfield has been less transparent in ways that are concerning. And one of the ways that has been shown is when we went back to Tremont City and we talked to the police chief, the radios, the public emergency radios that Springfield operates, like many other cities across the country, that any citizen with a police scanner or anything can listen in on. The city of Springfield has pulled out of that, and so that even affects other municipalities like Tremont City. So actually, while we were talking to the police chief, he said that, well, supposedly in the Springfield area, where there have been a report unconfirmed of a shooter at or near a school. And the problem is he didn't know about it because Springfield told him through the radio. It's because he heard from another chief from a different locality. And so I asked him, why would Springfield do that? Why would they want to be less transparent? And it's just because he said that they've received so much criticism. There's been so much heat on the city that, you know, if you can't hear what they're doing, then you are able to shield yourself from criticism from the public. And so that's been a kind of a common theme that we've talked that I've heard from not just people in nearby cities, but people in Springfield itself, where they've said that the city isn't listening to us, or they act like they're listening to us and then they just ignore our concerns. And we've seen that Springfield is not really being transparent with how they are trying to accommodate the Haitians and what that means for the services that are offered to its citizens.
Julio, one thing that they haven't been able to cover up is the car crash, the accident of the bus that everyone knows about and was widely reported. And in this first video that we're going to release here at Blaze News, a series of videos that people can find on YouTube at Blaze News Tonight. In the first one, there's a long interview with someone who goes to that scene and sort of explains what happened. Can you explain that to the audience? I mean, talk about that interview and the crash, because one thing I don't think that people fully appreciate is how traumatic that was for many kids because of what they saw. And you should tell us about it and what they saw.
Yeah, so that interview was with David Cook. He's a local business owner. He spent most of his life in Springfield. He did move away shortly after graduating college, but he's moved back, and his family has been here since the 60s. And he had family. He had family that was actually on the bus, not just witness to the bus. And the reason why that's significant is because this is something that was just unheard of prior to last year. And that's why it made national news. But this was really the turning point. The tensions with the problems that the Haitians have been causing in Springfield had been there for a little bit of time. But obviously, when they're crashing into school buses and other vehicles and property, and people are getting injured, people are getting killed as a result of that, that's obviously going to raise the stakes. And so that's why David took us and showed us around, because he wanted us to see that this is something that we don't typically deal with here. This is middle America. This is this was a city that you can have a family and have a comfortable life in a smallish Midwestern town, but because of the influx and the people that are taking advantage of the situation, that's going away. And I've talked to other residents since then who have lived here for pretty much their whole life, never thought they would move away from Springfield, but because of all the problems that they're now facing, they're now going to have to move away. And again, that's one of the lucky ones, because some people have been forced to move away because they can't afford housing here anymore. And that's kind of one thing that they really want to stress, is that the issue is not necessarily only when it comes to domesticated animals or local wildlife going missing. It's impacting real people in many ways, in just being able to drive safely on the road or being able to afford a house.
Just real quick on the bus, though, just real quick. I mean, the thing that comes across from what you've done reported is that a bunch of the children face long-lasting effects because of what they saw, right? They saw one of their classmates die or the body be carried away. Is that right?
Yeah, a lot of the kids, understandably, after that, they didn't want to get back on the school bus when school had reopened. They one of the family members had to, as kind of a negotiating tactic, they convinced their child to get back on the bus if the mom followed the school bus throughout the entire route until it got to the school. And so the mom had to do that for a couple of weeks afterwards before the child was finally comfortable enough to get back on it. But beyond that, I mean, it was nightmares from two different people independently. They said that what the children were experiencing was post-traumatic stress, essentially. This is from, these are young kids, right? So they wouldn't even think about having to go to funerals or having to deal with these injuries from being in that bus, because it's a school bus, right? There's no seatbelts. And this wasn't a bus that got hit and got moved off to the side of the road. It tumbled over, right? It rolled over. So that's a pretty traumatic experience to go through for the first day of school.
Julio, in the minute that we have left with you, I mean, let's just talk about the town of Springfield, because it was a town of 60,000 people. We know they dropped 20,000 migrants in there. So how is all of this coverage just affecting the town day to day right now?
They're not used to it, which is understandable. I mean, they didn't think they'd be in the spotlight in this way, and especially in this manner. And then when you have, of course, we're in election season, and then you throw in these fake bomb threats that are from overseas, and then the Democrats are saying that, see, this is Republicans, but of course it's actually appears to be a foreign disinformation campaign. They have hope that things can get better after the election. Should President Trump get back into office, but it's a matter of right now they just have to kind of grit their teeth and get through with it. But I'll tell you, it's a small town. When I was walking to dinner last night, I ran into people that I had talked to previously, just completely randomly. But that's just kind of a small example of just how kind of everyone knows everybody. And the person joked that it's Clark County. There's only 2 degrees of separation for here. So it's not hard to find people who have been directly impacted by this crisis one way or the other.
Well, Julio, we look forward to the rest of your reporting this week. I know we're going to have a bunch of videos out, and we'll have you back on the show later this week as well. So thanks so much for what you're doing.
Thanks.
Is Kamala Harris the embodiment of a narcissistic, abusive mother? Our next guest thinks so, and we'll break it down in just a minute. If you've ever had an abusive mother, then some of the repressive behavior out of our nation's leading politicians should look familiar. Kamala Harris embodied this well back in August when she talked about snatching patents.
I will snatch their patent so that we will take over. And yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. Yes, we can do that. It's the question is, do you have the will to do it? I have the will to do it.
Well, Josh Slocum, he wrote a piece for Blaze Media. He thinks that there's more to this than meets the eye. In an article for Align, he argues that we should really beware of our mommy dearest government, as we have seen its truly ugly side under the present administration. And he writes, why did it seem like our politicians and cultural institutions had the same mental derangement that animates private domestic abuse? So joining us now to discuss this fascinating story is Josh Slocum. He is the co-host and creator of the Disaffected podcast. So Josh, thanks so much for your time. So what do you believe is behind the left and their fixation on Trump in a way that mirrors this emotional abuse?
In a word, cluster B personality disorders. That means pathological narcissism, emotional instability, and exploitative behavior. You rolled a couple of clips introducing this piece, and I don't know quite whether to laugh. It was a little bit like watching home movies.
Oh boy. Well, tell us more about this. I mean, what role does fear and manipulation play in this sort of abuse, and how do you see that mirrored in our politics right now?
Yeah, well, what I see happening in our politics right now is exactly a mirror of what we have traditionally thought of as private domestic abuse. I say it's gone public and feral. I grew up in a household that was headed by a mother like Mommy Dearest, and the manipulation, the dishonesty, the punishing people around you for things that you have actually done that they did not do, reversing the situation so that victims appear to be perpetrators and people who are doing wrong actually appear to be victims is all very familiar. And I think right now we are living in a cluster B society. As we say this on Disaffected every week, this is just a scaled up version of the cluster B abusive home.
So, okay, take it from the home then into the current political climate surrounding Trump for us.
Okay, so everybody who gets to the level of grasping for the presidency is going to have some higher narcissistic traits. That just seems to be a prerequisite for the job. So everybody who gets to this level of politics is going to have an elevated level of narcissism. What I think we're seeing right now, though, is just off the scale. When I look at Kamala Harris, excuse me, when I listen to her and I see her change her affect, change her accent, brazenly lie about policies that she claims Donald Trump is going to be for that are going to hurt people, that are going to hurt women. He's going to ban abortion. She is consciously lying, but she's taking advantage of sort of a human psychology dynamic. Many people have a very difficult time believing and accepting that women are as capable of being, well, evil as men are. There are good men and bad men, good women and bad women. But women, unfortunately, in politics right now, I think are getting away with a lot of flagrantly abusive, dishonest behavior because they appear, you can hear their voices, they sound more like your mother, and they point at Donald Trump, who's very brash and outspoken, and he's high on narcissistic traits too, but I don't see him as dishonest as I see the other side. And so I think somebody like Kamala Harris is actually much more dangerous than we credit. She's not stupid. She's not feckless. She knows what she's doing. And when I watched that debate between Harris and Trump, I was even surprised. I've been talking about this on Disaffected for 3.5 years. I grew up with a cluster B mother. I did not realize how skilled Kamala is at actually changing her persona. She is not to be underestimated.
Josh, we're going to have you back. It's very interesting. And I'm sure you say more about this on your podcast. But in 30 seconds, how do we get out of this? What's the solution? What do we move towards?
We have to recognize what we're seeing, and we have to tell the truth, and we have to name it specifically out loud. This is narcissistic and personality disordered behavior, rampant narcissism, rampant sociopathic exploitation of other people, while pulling the wool over everyone else's eyes and making it seem like the people who are perpetrating these acts against the American people are actually the victims. We've got to stop being so nice, and we have to stop believing truisms like, well, it's probably just stupidity or incompetence. No, it's not. It's not. It's calculated and it's conscious. And if we don't catch it, it's going to get us.
Josh Slocum, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
And Peterson, it's interesting that he goes back to the debate because I heard, the day after the debate that Kamala Harris had the top LA talent, the CAA agency, one of the biggest Hollywood agencies out there, working with her, just getting her ready for the debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think to his point, I mean, she is bad at preparation, and if you take Josh seriously, which I think you should, that's because of a personality flaw, and that's because she refuses to take things seriously and to prepare. So I don't think she can actually change that much. And she has, you're right, she has all the help in the world. The top people in the world are willing to help her with her image.
Well, she can't change that much, but she can change her accents all the time. And, at some point, will people just start seeing through this?
This is where I kind of agree with him. How could you do that with a straight face?
How do you?
Unless you were so narcissistic, you just didn't care. It's like, oh, people will just go along with it. I'll just pretend to be this and I'll pretend to be that with these fake accents.
The media covers for her. We will not here at Blaze News. If you like Blaze News tonight, be sure to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform. And you know what? Joe Biden, he's going to be out there. He's still the president for now, and we'll be breaking everything back down tomorrow night.